So here's the piece. How the UK military and intelligence establishment is working to stop Jeremy Corbyn become Prime Minister. This is a story from 2019. The article from December 2019 states, officials in the UK military and intelligence establishment have been sources for at least 34 major national media stories that cast Jeremy Corbyn as a danger to British security, new research shows. The stories, which quote former or current members of the Army, Navy and Special Forces, as well as MI5, MI6 and an ex-senior civil servant, have averaged one every 6 weeks since Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party in 2015. There have, however, been significant spikes in frequency during the 2017 and 2019 general election campaigns. There's a strong suggestion that for some stories, intelligence officials have themselves provided secret documents to journalists as part of what appears to be a campaign. Every story has been picked up across national print media, often setting the news agenda and chiming with statements from the Conservative government ministers. Nearly every story appeared in 4 papers: the Daily Telegraph, the Times, the Daily Mail or the Sun. Our research also found 440 articles in the UK press since September 2015, specifically mentioning Corbyn as a, quote, threat to national security. The intelligence services and the military are supposed to abide by the constitutional principle of non-involvement in political affairs. But the numerous instances of serving national security officials briefing against Corbyn in the media raises questions about whether this principle has been upheld. So, Matt, I've got to start off with this one. It's an article from December 2019. Isn't this old news? I mean, why is this relevant now?
It's a good question. And I think that the answer is the kernel of the answer is, I don't think you can really understand systems until they stop working as they should, or at least you can't visibly understand them. So we don't really understand. Going back to your question about is Britain a democracy, it can seem like it's a democracy when everything is run as they want it to, i.e. you have 2 sort of factions of the same political party vying for power. So Labour under Blair, the Tories under Cameron. That's all fine. Everyone can go out to vote. No one has to worry. But when someone like Jeremy Corbyn appears, which is a very rare instance in terms of becoming a leader of a major political party in the West, an anti-imperialist socialist, you see these people have to come out of the shadows because the system stops running as they like it to. And I think what happened to Jeremy Corbyn is a lesson that we all need to learn, because those lessons, we don't get to learn them very often. And in terms of the story that I mentioned, which I actually wrote, it shows that when the going gets tough and their interests get threatened, these institutions, which we're told are neutral and about defending us and our country, i.e. the military and the intelligence services, that's not their role. And these are important revelations because they have huge amounts of power in our political system, number one. Secondly, they're nearly completely secret. In terms of the MI5 and MI6, they are completely secret. And there's a degree of transparency with the military itself, but the intelligence services, we don't know anything about what they do. So then when you start to understand that we have these huge edifices which are acting in a political way to ensure the interests of the elite, and they bypass democracy and mess around with democracy in a completely unaccountable way, then it's an important thing for the left to learn. And I think that the reason I chose it now is you're seeing with Jeremy Corbyn now, I think the denouement of a campaign which has been rolling since 2015, and it's carrying on because he's still a threat. He isn't a threat in terms of actual power because he's not Labour leader anymore, but he's a threat as an example. And what's happening to him now is they have to destroy him as an example, because if he gets to survive and he's still a symbol, it means that that could happen again. And young politicos who want to be politicians or join the Labour Party and rise up the ranks, they'll look at him as an example and try and copy him, and they don't want that at all. So the suspension from the Labour Party, the removing of the whip, it's all part of this process, and everyone and parts of the left seem to be surprised that Starmer is doing this, but Starmer is a representative of the British establishment, in my view. And he is part of this process, which is just trying to obliterate the idea that progressive change can happen in the UK. And in fact, I think that what we saw from 2015 to 2019 showed that under the current system, well, I'm talking about the media, the deep state, the intelligence services, the military, I don't think we can have a progressive leader rise up. It's impossible. Because even if Corbyn had won, can you imagine what would have happened then? The ferocity of the attacks, and he wasn't even in power, that would add to that the fact that he makes decisions and is in control of our military, number one. Secondly, imagine coronavirus. Any little mistake that they'd made, which would have been inevitable, would have been exaggerated beyond belief. So he wouldn't have lasted months. Now, that's a huge problem for us as progressives. And I think that the left and people, at least who want a more humane and just foreign policy, and I think mainly the attacks on Corbyn were about foreign policy. I think that they need to get an awareness of what's called parapolitics, which is often people don't want to get involved in because they don't want to be called conspiracy theorists, or they don't want to be seen as people who believe in shadowy forces that might or might not exist. But in fact, that's a way of stopping people actually looking at and analysing a whole section of society which has huge amounts of power. And I think any tactics and strategies we come up with to bring about progressive change in the UK has to include an analysis and a discussion of the power of the deep state. And by the deep state, I'm talking about specifically the intelligence services and the military. So it remains relevant, and we're kind of seeing the denouement of a process which I think the article deals with, but is ongoing. And that also relates to foreign powers as well, because we haven't got any hard evidence that the Israeli government has been working against Jeremy Corbyn, but that he's the first pro-Palestinian leader that's risen up to a position of power in the Western world. You would imagine, knowing what most intelligence agencies are up to, there would have been some reaction to that. So, but again, that's on the left. We can't talk about that because people are scared to. And I think that what needs to happen is we need to kind of understand that without an analysis of this, what's being done to Corbyn will succeed, and we won't even have the vocabulary to fight back.
I've actually got two interesting comments here, which are going to lead into what was going to be my next question. So thanks, guys, for both thinking like my questions and also getting involved in the comments. So Michael Coleman says he did not need any help from the military. He did it all by himself. And James Poisman says Brexit needs to happen. Corbyn had no chance of election because he opposed a proper Brexit. Government forcing lockdowns is not right as well. It is all disastrous. But in regards to that, this is what both of those kind of lead to a question that I was going to ask, which isn't this the kind of victimhood that the left always indulges in? I mean, did this really make any difference to his election chances? Wasn't he just an unlikable kind of weird guy who was on the wrong side of Brexit? Isn't that why he lost? And isn't that really the lesson that we should take from this?
No, I don't think it is. I think that we need to kind of zoom out from the immediate situation, which is Jeremy Corbyn, and we need to look at what this tells us in a wider way about British society, because it's not going to be Jeremy Corbyn the next time this happens, but the same forces that are protecting the same interests will be activated again. So we need to have some kind of analysis and awareness of at least of their existence. And it's also an outrage because, as you mentioned in the article that you outlined at the start, these institutions, I mean, we don't have a constitution, but in terms of the unwritten constitution, everyone operates on the understanding that the military and intelligence services don't interfere in the domestic political system. I mean, of course, they overthrow governments all over the world all the time, but in terms of the domestic system, they're meant to stay hands off, and they don't. And they pretty much can get away with not interfering at all, usually, as I mentioned, because they don't have their interests threatened. Keir Starmer's not a threat. You're never going to see them briefing against Keir Starmer. You wouldn't have seen them briefing against Tony Blair because they are part of the same system. But the point is, we need to understand that these interests exist. We need to understand that they will activate themselves if they get threatened. So I think that Corbyn, as great as he is in terms of what he's put up with, he's not the issue. The issue is our society and what barriers exist towards progressive change. And anyone who wants to bring about progressive change, I feel, needs to understand this whole area.
Right. Well, I want to bring in Hilary and Desiree on this. It's a big topic, and I guess it, rumbling on in the background of the internal divisions in the Labour Party. But, this story's trying to talk about what the establishment looks like in the UK. And Hilary, I know that you've been looking to write around this and so forth, and I'd love to get your opinion. What does this tell us about the establishment in the UK, and what do you think about what Jeremy Corbyn represents?
I think that one has to bring in here the Labour Party's relationship to this establishment. I think it's important to know that right from the beginnings of the Labour Party, though they've had and now continue, well, many Labour Party people defend the link with the unions, which is the Labour Party's progressive, dimension. But the other side of that is a complete deference to our existing political system. So built into their founding statement in 2006, and then again in 2017, or 2018 rather, was an explicit statement that all the policies of the Labour Party, public ownership and so on, could be achieved through the existing state. Now, I think that's been shown not to be the case, and I think Matt's right here. I think it's not. I mean, I would, and I'm sure he'd agree that I would go beyond the question of the military to the question of the Treasury and its relationship to the city, and how that was decisive in, for example, defeating the ideas of Tony Benn around democratizing public ownership, so that there's a kind of systemic bias in the nature of the British state, which is to do with its unwritten constitution. I mean, we all know from our own kind of experience of organizations that when the rules aren't written, it's the powerful, the elites, whether particularly the unelected elites, that benefit because they make up the rules as they go along, because there's no sort of rules that they need to abide by. So I think that being able to address the role of the military and also the role of the city requires the left to be part of a movement for democratic change. I think this is coming actually at the moment from Scotland, from what could be the breakup of Britain. And I think we're going to see the workings of the establishment. Certainly be good to watch this declassified organisation investigate, the ways in which the establishment will work against the breakup of Britain, because it'll mean the breakup of the challenging of the military, the nuclear Trident, which is based in Scotland, Faslane, the breakup of the Treasury. I mean, it'll break up these highly centralised. Britain's a highly centralised country. So that's another aspect of its lack of democracy. The fact that local government has no written power. I mean, I used to work briefly at the GLC. I coordinated a unit called the Popular Planning Unit, which was about popular participation in economic policy. And what happened? The GLC was abolished. When I remember talking to people in Canada and other countries, and they couldn't believe, that the government had the power to abolish a layer of government. And the reason for that is because there's no written constitution. Local government has no rights. So I finally say that a lesson for us on the left is that I feel we kind of should have thought this through a bit more, that in a way we all found ourselves working our guts out to get Jeremy elected, with a kind of naive belief that electoral politics was enough, even though intellectually we knew it wasn't. And I just think we've got to have a bit of lesson learning ourselves in order to be more strategic in how we approach a new opportunity for the left, which I agree with Matt is likely to come because Jeremy has left a legacy which they're now trying to destroy.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring Desiree in here. What do you think about this? I think there was a lot of nodding along with what Hilary is saying in the backstage area. And for my part, I'd like to say if if the state is a weather vane, I'd rather be the wind and change its direction from outside personally. But I'd love to hear what you think about everything that's been said here.
I kind of agreed with everybody, really. I know. But I kind of felt like the idea that when what Matt was talking about, which is incredibly important about these deep dark forces that are working to undermine what we think of might be democracy and what we think of might be our rights, has always happened for certain communities. I know I sound like a broken record, but it really has. Like somebody dying in police custody, a black and brown person, a Muslim person, somebody dying in police custody, trying to get justice for that relative that's died. They cannot, because the weight of the police are upon them, and nobody listens to them, nobody hears them. And that's what I mean about that these forces have always been there and working against certain communities more than others. And now we see that it's kind of working against everybody. In terms of Jeremy Corbyn, and the Labour Party, I mean, the Labour Party continue to engage in this kind of neoliberalistic policy project that kind of started with Blair. It keeps going, and I think it's the triumph of individualism, and that's what defeated Corbyn. That people felt personally attacked. They thought that we're going to have something was being taken away from them, which kind of neatly segues into what I'm going to be talking about in a bit. But that he couldn't succeed because he was thinking more about community than he was about individualism. And that's a sad indictment of where we are right now.